Right now, there are people living in countries that officially do not exist, countries with governments, militaries, currencies, and millions of citizens, countries you can visit, work in, and even get a passport from. But here is the problem: not a single nation on Earth recognizes them. We are not talking about failed states or lawless territories. These are functioning countries with everything a nation needs except one thing: permission to exist. By the end of this video, you will discover 5 countries that have been erased from the official map of the world, even though millions of people call them home. And the reasons why might shock you. Let's dive in. Our first country is in East Africa, and it has been independent for over 30 years. It has a working democracy, its own currency, a military, and a population of 5.7 million plus people. It even issues its own passports, but 0 countries recognize it. This is Somaliland. And if you want the full deep dive on how a country can function perfectly for 3 decades without recognition, we have covered that in detail. Link in the description. But here is what makes Somaliland fascinating. It is actually more stable than the country it broke away from in 1991, while Somaliland collapsed into one of the worst civil wars in modern history. Somaliland declared independence and said, "We are done with this chaos." And it worked. While Somaliland became synonymous with piracy, terrorism, and failed government, Somaliland built a functioning democracy with peaceful elections, a growing economy, and relative safety. They have their own president, their own parliament, their own courts. The Somaliland shilling is their currency. Police patrol the streets, students go to universities, businesses operate normally. By every measure, it is a country. So why does nobody recognize it? Because of one massive problem: African Union rules. The African Union has an unofficial policy: do not recognize breakaway states. If they recognize Somaliland, it opens the door for dozens of other regions across Africa to declare independence. It sets a precedent that could redraw the entire continent. Somalia, despite being barely functional, refuses to let Somaliland go, and the international community backs Somalia, because recognizing Somaliland would mean admitting that Somalia permanently lost control of a third of its territory. So, Somaliland exists in this bizarre limbo, functioning as a country in every practical way, but invisible on the official map. 5.7 million people living in a nation the world pretends is not there. And the craziest part, they are fine with it. Somaliland is not waiting for permission anymore. They have moved on. Now let's talk about a divided island in the Mediterranean that has been frozen in time since 1974. On one side you have the Republic of Cyprus, a European Union member state. On the other side you have Northern Cyprus, a country that only one nation on Earth recognizes. The story begins in 1974 when Turkey invaded Cyprus after a Greek-backed coup. Turkey took control of the northern third of the island, and in 1983, Northern Cyprus declared independence. Turkey immediately recognized it. The rest of the world, radio silence. Here is what makes this situation wild. Northern Cyprus is a beach paradise that almost nobody can legally visit. The territory has stunning Mediterranean coastline, ancient ruins, beautiful mountains, and a population of about 380,000 people. It has its own government, its own flag, its own currency, called the Turkish lira. Wait, actually, they just use Turkey's currency and its own military backed by 35,000 Turkish troops. But if you are not Turkish traveling, there is complicated. Most countries do not recognize Northern Cyprus, so flying directly there means entering through what the international community considers illegally occupied territory. Your passport gets stamped, and suddenly you might have issues entering other countries, especially Greece or the Republic of Cyprus. The capital city, Nicosia, is the last divided capital in the world. There is literally a buffer zone running through the middle of the city, controlled by UN peacekeepers. On one side you are in the EU, walk across the green line, and you are in a country that does not officially exist. And here is the tragedy: Greek Cypriots and Turkish Cypriots lived together for centuries. Families were torn apart in 1974. People fled their homes and still cannot return. 50 years later, there are entire ghost towns in the buffer zone, frozen since the day people evacuated. Multiple peace negotiations have failed. The Republic of Cyprus joined the EU in 2004, which gave them even less incentive to compromise. Turkey will not back Down and northern Cyprus remains trapped, recognized by one country, ignored by the rest. It is a functioning society living in geopolitical limbo, where your morning coffee is in Europe, but your lunch is in a country that does not officially exist. Here's a country most people have never heard of, and that is exactly the problem. Western Sahara is roughly the size of the United Kingdom, sitting on the northwest coast of Africa. It has a population of about 600,000 people, and it has been in a frozen conflict for nearly 50 years. The story starts in 1975 when Spain, the colonial power, pulled out of Western Sahara. Immediately, Morocco moved in and said, "This is ours now." The local population, the Sahrawi people, said absolutely not, and formed an independence movement called the Polisario Front. A war broke out that lasted 16 years, that in 1991. A ceasefire was signed with a promise. The Sahrawi people would get a referendum to vote on independence. That referendum was supposed to happen in 1992. It is now 2026. Still has not happened. Here is the current situation. Morocco controls about 80% of Western Sahara. They have built a massive sand wall, one of the longest military barriers in the world, dividing the territory. On one side, Moroccan-controlled cities with infrastructure and development. On the other side, the Polisario-controlled desert, where almost nothing exists. But here is where it gets complicated. About 54 countries recognize Western Sahara as independent. That is more recognition than most countries on this list. The African Union recognizes it, but the UN still calls it a non-self-governing territory, which is diplomatic language, for we have no idea what to do with this. And Morocco is not backing down. They have invested billions into the territory. They have moved Moroccan settlers there. They claim it as their southern provinces and refuse to even discuss independence. Meanwhile, over 170,000 Sahrawi refugees live in camps in Algeria, waiting for a homeland they may never get to return to. Some have been there for 40+ years. Entire generations born in refugee camps. Western Sahara is the forgotten conflict. No major media coverage. No international pressure. Just a stalemate that has lasted half a century. With 600,000 people living in a country the world cannot agree exists. All right. If you think the previous countries were strange, this one is genuinely bizarre. There's a place where the Soviet Union never ended, where Lenin statues still stand, where the KGB still operates, where you can buy groceries with Soviet rubles, and where the hammer and sickle still flies as the official flag in 2026. This is Transnistria, and we just did a full breakdown of how this Soviet time capsule still exists. Link in the description. But here is the short version. Transnistria is a thin strip of land between Moldova and Ukraine. When the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991 and everyone was escaping communism, Transnistria did the opposite. They declared independence so they could stay Soviet. Think about that. While the Berlin Wall was falling and Eastern Europe was celebrating freedom, Transnistria said no thanks. We like communism, and we're keeping it. A brief war in 1992 ended with Russian troops backing Transnistria, and they have been frozen in time ever since. Not a single UN member state recognizes them. Even Russia does not officially recognize Transnistria, but they keep 1,500 troops there and provide economic support. Walking through the capital, Tiraspol, is surreal. It looks like 1985. Soviet architecture everywhere. Propaganda posters. Massive Lenin statue in the central square. The state emblem is literally a hammer and sickle. Streets named after Marx and Engels. It is a living museum where 350,000 people actually live. And the currency? Plastic coins. Seriously, the Transnistrian ruble uses plastic coins because metal would be too expensive. They look like monopoly money, but that is what people use to buy bread. Most residents have triple citizenship. A Transnistrian passport to prove they exist to Transnistria, a Moldovan or Russian passport to actually travel anywhere, and sometimes a third for good measure, because your Transnistrian passport is worthless outside that narrow strip of land. But here is what keeps Transnistria alive. Russia uses it as leverage over Moldova. As long as Russian troops are there, Moldova cannot take it back. And as long as Transnistria exists, Moldova cannot fully join the EU or NATO. It is a frozen conflict that benefits Russia and traps everyone else. So the Soviet Union lives on in this tiny sliver of land, refusing to die, with its plastic coins and Lenin statues, existing in a geopolitical limbo that has lasted over 30 years. And now, our number one unrecognized country, Abkhazia. And this one might be the most tragic story on the list. Abkhazia sits on the Black Sea coast in the Caucasus region. It is stunningly beautiful. Subtropical climate mountains, meeting the sea beaches that were once Soviet resort destinations. It has about 245,000 people and has been de facto independent since 1993. The story begins with the collapse of the Soviet Union. Abkhazia was part of Georgia, but when Georgia pushed for independence from the USSR, Abkhazia said, "Wait, if you can leave the Soviet Union, we can leave Georgia." Georgia said absolutely not. War broke out in 1992. The war was brutal. Tens of thousands died. Ethnic cleansing occurred on both sides. By 1993, Abkhaz forces, backed by Russian support, won Georgia, lost control, and Abkhazia has been independent ever since. But here is the catch. Only 4 countries recognize Abkhazia: Russia, Nicaragua, Venezuela, and Nauru. That is it. The rest of the world considers it occupied Georgian territory. And Russia's recognition comes with strings attached. Russia does not just support Abkhazia, they control it. Russian troops are stationed there. The Russian ruble is the currency. Russian companies own major businesses. Abkhazia has independence in name only. In reality, it is a Russian protectorate for the people living there. It is a strange existence. You cannot fly directly to Abkhazia because no international airline recognizes it. You have to drive in from Russia. Your Abkhaz passport is worthless for international travel. The economy barely functions without Russian subsidies, and the beaches that were once filled with Soviet tourists, now they are mostly empty, crumbling Soviet-era resorts. Line the coast. Invler is falling apart. Young people leave for opportunities in Russia. The population is shrinking. Georgia has not given up its claim. Every few years there is talk of negotiations, but Russia has no incentive to let go. And Abkhazia is too dependent on Russia to truly be independent. So Abkhazia exists in this sad limbo, a beautiful land trapped between a past it cannot return to and a future it cannot reach. A country that won its independence but lost its freedom. So there you have it. 5 countries that exist in every practical way but do not officially exist at all. Somaliland functioning perfectly without recognition. Northern Cyprus, a divided paradise, frozen since 1974. Western Sahara, the forgotten conflict. Transnistria, the Soviet Union that refused to die, and Abkhazia, independence without freedom. Millions of people live their entire lives in countries the world pretends are not there. They go to work, raise families, vote in elections, and carry passports that most of the world will not accept. And the craziest part, more of these unrecognized countries appear every few years. The map we are taught in school is not the map people actually live in. If you want the full deep dives on Somaliland and Transnistria, we have got detailed videos on both. Links in the description. Hit subscribe, because we are covering more of the world's strangest geopolitical situations. And drop a comment which of these 5 surprised you the most. The world is way weirder than the official map shows. And sometimes a country does not need permission to exist. It just needs people who believe it does. I will see you in the next one.